In the year 1847, Utah territory stretched vast and untamed beneath skies that seemed endless. Fields of golden wheat swayed under winds that carried secrets older than Memorion. The outskirts of Salt Lake City, where civilization barely clung to existence, stood a house no one dared approach. Anymore, it was said to be cursed, a place where shadows moved when they shouldn't, and whispers echoed long after voices fell silent. Man who lived there was known only as Mr. Whitmore, a tall, gaunt figure with eyes like storm clouds, perpetually shadowed by some unseen wave. Rarely ventured into town, preferring instead the solitude of his sprawling property, but those who encountered him spoke of an unsettling aura about him, as though he carried within him the weight of countless sins. Emily had never heard these stories when she first arrived in Utah. Came alone, part of a wagon train, seeking refuge from the devastation cholera had wrought upon her family. Orphaned and desperate for work, she accepted Mr. Whitmore's offer to help tend his household, greeted her with polite detachment, showing her around the creaking old house before retreating to his study. At first glance, it seemed ordinary enough: a parlor with faded furniture, a kitchen worn but functional, an attic room furnished sparsely for her use. But Emily soon realized there was something off about the placid air. Felt heavier here, as if pressing down on her chest, and the silence wasn't natural, not the kind born of absence, but rather of concealment. Their first few days passed uneventful. Whitmore kept mostly to himself, emerging only briefly to give instructions or check on Koresh. Spoke little, his words clipped and measured, yet his gaze lingered often on Emily, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. On evening, while dusting the parlor, Emily noticed something odd in the mirror above the fireplace. Her reflection did not move when she stopped mid-motion. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if listening to something only it could hearken. It smiled, a cold, thin smile that sent ice rushing through her veins. When she turned around, the room was empty. Emily tried to convince herself it was nothing more than exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. After all, traveling across the country, enduring loss and hardship had left her fragile, but deep inside she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That night, lying awake in her small attic bedroom, Emily heard footsteps below, soft yet deliberate, moved from one end of the house to the other, stopping briefly outside her door before continuing down the hall. She told herself it was Mr. Whitmore, checking the locks, or perhaps wind rattling the old boards, but deep inside she knew better. Because earlier that day she had found a locket hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the kitchen. Inside were faded photographs of 4 women, each more beautiful than the last. Their faces stared back at her with expressions frozen between hope and despair. Emily asked Mr. Whitmore about the locket later. That evening his reaction was immediate and chilling, snatched it from her hands so violently that she stumbled backward into the wall. "You should not have touched that," he said, his voice low and trembling. "Those women are gone. Leave them be." From that moment on, everything changed. Next morning, Emily woke to find the curtains drawn tight, despite leaving them open the night before. A chill ran down her spine as she approached the window. Outside, the garden lay untouched, dew glistening on the grass, but standing near the edge of the woods was a figure dressed in blankets, face obscured by shadows. Emily called out, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised a hand pointing toward the house, her heart pounding. Emily rushed inside. The front door slammed shut behind her, though she hadn't touched it. Sound reverberated through the house like a gunshot. She stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the closed door to the basement, where Whitmore always kept it locked, forbidding anyone from entering, but now it hung slightly ajar against her better judgment. Emily stepped closer. Scent of damp earth wafted up from the darkness below. She hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the rusted handle. The stairs groaned beneath her weight, each step sinking slightly, as if the wood itself resisted her presence. At the bottom, she found shelves lined with jars, filled with murky liquid floating within were what appeared to be human fingers, toes, even patches of skin. Her stomach churned as realization dawned. These were trophies, pieces of the women Mr. Whitmore had married. Suddenly, the temperature dropped and the light flickered behind her. came a whisper, soft but unmistakable, lurching around. Emily saw nothing but darkness swallowing the staircase. Hope panicked. She clawed her way back upstairs, slamming the door behind her, only to find Mr. Whitmore waiting for her, his face pale and expressionless. "What did you see?" he asked calmly. To calm, Emily shook her head, unable to speak. Whitmore nodded as if expecting her silence. "Good girl," he murmured, patting her shoulder. "Some secrets are best left buried." Yet later that night, lying rigid in bed, Emily swore she felt fingers brushing against her cheek, cold, wet fingers, smelling faintly of earth. Following days blurred together in a haze of dread. Emily began noticing things out of place. Objects moved slightly from where she left them. A chair pushed closer to the table, curtains drawn shut despite leaving them open on afternoon while hanging laundry outside. She saw the same figure again among the trees. This time it was closer, its face clear. It was one of the women from the locket. Emily froze, unable to look away. The woman's lips parted, forming words Emily couldn't hearken. She pointed once more toward the house, terrified. Emily fled inside, bolting the door behind her, but the sense of being watched followed her everywhere. Even in the daylight, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Be the fourth night, Emily could no longer bear it. Packed her belongings, intending to leave at dawn, but as she prepared to sleep one final time in the attic room, she heard a new sound, a melody drifting through the walls, faint and haunting. It sounded like a lullaby sung in a language she didn't understand. Wrong against her will, Emily followed the music. It led her to the parlor, where the mirror above the fireplace glowed faintly within its glass. She saw not her own reflection, but the faces of the four women, their eyes wide with terror, mouths moving silently. And one by one, they turned to look directly at her. "Help us," they whispered, their voices overlapping in a chorus of despair. Emily stumbled backward, tripping over the rug. When she looked up, the mirror was dark once more, but the house was no longer quiet. Footsteps thundered overhead, doors slammed shut on their own, and from somewhere deep within came a low, guttural laugh. Whitmore emerged from the shadows, his face twisted into a grimace. "Welcome to your fate," he said, just as it was theirs. The veil of silence. Emily woke to the sound of her own scream. The room was dark save for the faint glow of moonlight streaming through cracks in the shutters. Her heart raced as she tried to steady her breathing, but the memory of Mr. Whitmore's twisted smile lingered like a stain on her mind. "You shouldn't have come here," he had said, his voice cold and unyielding. Then he turned away, leaving her alone with the shadows that seemed alive, now writhing along the wall. She sat up, clutching the blanket around her trembling body. The house groaned softly, as if settling into its ancient bones, but beneath the creaks and sighs, there was another sound, a soft rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere. Emily knew she should stay put, lock herself in the attic until daylight, but curiosity gnawed at her, insistent and relentless. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was anger too. Anger at being trapped in this nightmare, anger at the secrets buried within these walls. Pulling on her shawl, she crept down the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the house itself resisted her descent. Tapping grew louder, guiding her toward the parlor. Inside, the mirror above the fireplace shimmered faintly, as if reflecting light from somewhere unseen. Against her better judgment, Emily stepped closer. Her reflection stared back, but it wasn't hers anymore. Instead, she saw one of the women from the lock of their face, pale eyes wide with terror. "Help us," she mouthed silently before vanishing. The room plunged into darkness. Emily stumbled backward, colliding with something solid. Whitmore stood there, his silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm, but his hands were clenched fists, trembling slightly at his sedesi. "Saw them," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. Here they're still." Harrimer Whitmore sighed deeply, as if weary of explaining something obvious. "They're not real," he said, stepping closer. "Just echoes, memories trapped in this house like flies in amber, doomed to repeat their final moments forever." His words sent a chill through her, not because they made sense, but because they didn't. If they were merely echoes, then why did they beg for help, and why did Mr. Whitmore look so haunted when he spoke of them? "Tell me what happened to them," Emily demanded. Her courage surprising even herself. Where were they for a moment? Mr. Whitmore hesitated then. He gestured for her to psych reluctantly. She obeyed, sinking onto the edge of the worn couch. Took a seat across from her, leaning forward, elbows resting on his. Niece first was Abigail. He began, his voice distant, as if recounting someone else's life. Came to me full of dreams, eager to start anew, but she grew restless, dissatisfied with our quiet, leafy own night. She wandered into the woods, never to return. His gaze shifted to the floor, as if Ashemedden. Then there was Clara Clever. Sharp-tongued Clarash uncovered things. She shouldn't have truths about my past. When she threatened to leave, taking those secrets with her, well, let's just say, she chose poorly. Emily's stomach churned, and the others. Others, he muttered almost to himself. He followed the same path drawn by fate or Folliac, believing they could escape the pull of this place, but none succeeded. As he spoke, the air grew colder. Shadows lengthened, stretching unnaturally across the walls. Emily glanced around, realizing too late that she wasn't Alan. Figures materialized, slowly taking shape. In the corners of the room, 4 women, their forms translucent, yet unmistakable. Whitmore froze mid-sentence, his expression shifting from sorrow to fury. Jet out, he snarled, rising abruptly. Live no, but Emily couldn't move. The women surrounded her, their faces etched with pain and accusation. Their lips moved, forming words she couldn't hearken. One of them reached out, brushing her arm. A surge of images flooded Emily's mind, flashes of arguments, desperate pleas, hands raised in violence, blood staining the earth beneath the trees, and always Mr. Whitmore watching, silent and unmoved. When the vision faded, Emily found herself kneeling on the floor. Whitmore loomed over her, his face contorted with rage. "You've seen enough," he growled, grabbing her roughly by the arm. "It's time you joined them." With strength born of desperation, Emily wrenched free, bolted toward the door, throwing it open. Night air hit her like a slap, cool and sharp, baned her. The house roared to life, windows shattering, doors slamming shut. Ran blindly into the forest branches, clawed at her skin roots, tripped her feet, but she pushed on, driven by sheer will to survive. Then she heard Ida's low, guttural laugh echoing through the trees. Whitmore emerged from the darkness, his form flickering like smoke. "Oh, can't run from what's already inside you," he said, his voice layered with malice. Emily backed away until her foot caught on a root, fell hard, hitting the ground with a thud. Above her the sky darkened, clouds swirling unnaturally fast. Lightning split the heavens, illuminating 4 figures standing among the trees. Women watched silently, their faces no longer fearful but resolute. He held hands, forming a circle around Emily, and as Mr. Whitmore lunged toward her, they stepped forward, blocking his path. A blinding flash consumed the force. When Emily opened her eyes, she was Alan Eve. Storm had passed, leaving only silence in its wake. Dragging herself to her feet, she stumbled back toward the house. It stood eerily quiet, its windows dark, but as she approached, she noticed something new. Carved into the front door were 4 names: Abigail, Clara, Elizabeth, Martha. Beneath them, freshly etched into the wood, was her own. Emily stared at the door, her name carved deeply into the wood. Her breath came in shallow gasps, as if the air itself refused to fill her lungs. House loomed before her, no longer just a structure, but a living thing, watching, waiting. She reached out, trembling fingers brushing against the letters of her Nemethi were still warm, as though freshly etched by an unseen hand. A wave of nausea swept over her, and she stumbled backward, falling onto the damp earth. What was happening to her? Had those women appeared only to vanish again? And why did Mr. Whitmore seem so determined to keep her here? As she sat there, trying to steady her thoughts, the forest around her began to change. Trees seemed taller, their branches twisting unnaturally toward the sky. The wind carried whispers, faint yet insistent, threading through her mind like cobweb scum. Inside, the voices urged, "You belong, Hereno." Emily whispered to herself, shaking her head. "Don't belong here." But even as she said it, doubt crept into visions. The shadows, the way the house seemed to pull at her very soul. It felt as though something within her had always known this place. Slowly, she rose to her feet, urged to flee ward with an inexplicable need to understand. She couldn't leave, not yet, not without answers. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door inside. The house was darker than before, air thick with the scent of earth and decay. Parlor lay in disarray, furniture, overturned curtains torn from their rods. In the center of the room stood the mirror. Its surface rippled like water, reflecting nothing but shifting shapes. Millie approached cautiously. Whispers grew louder, now forming disjointed phrases. Save us, save yourself. Escape him. Her reflection appeared distorted, stretched thin like molten glass. It split into two figures, and was her own face, wide-eyed and terrified. Other was Mr. Whitmore, his expression cruel and triumphant. Thinks you're weak, he thinks you'll break, but we know better, don't we? The voice wasn't hers, nor was it his. It belonged to the women, the ones who had vanished. Suddenly stepped back, heart pounding. Who are you? She asked aloud. What do you want from me? Want justice, came the reply, soft, yet commanding. Justice for what was done to us before she could respond. The mirror, shattered shards of glass, exploded outward, slicing through the air. Millie threw up her arms, shielding her face. When the storm subsided, she lowered her hands. The room was silent, save for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. The floor where the mirror had been lay a single shard, gleaming faintly in the dim light. She picked it up hesitantly. Glass was cool against her skin. Etched into its surface was a date, 1840. Memory surged forward unbidden. Whitmore, standing over a grave, dirt caked on his hands, his lips moving in silent prayer. Or perhaps a curse. Millie clutched the shard tighter. Weight of her secrets this house held, they were tied to that yurto. The deaths of those women. Footsteps echoed behind her. Slow. The liberator Whitmore entered the room, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. You shouldn't have come back, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. This is your last chance to leave. Leave, Emily repeated, bitter. There's nowhere left to. Gomer. Whitmore tilted his head, studying her, as though seeing her for the first time. Perhaps you're right, he murmured. Perhaps you've already chosen without warning. He lunged at her, but instead of fear, Emily felt anger, white-hot and consuming. She sidestepped, dodging his grasp. Shard in her hand glinted. Dangaroozla, tell me the truth, she demanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. What really happened to Themer? Whitmore paused mid-modiona. Flicker of uncertainty crossed his Facethan. He smiled, a cold, hollow Smalithi. Chose their fates, he said softly, just as you will choose yours. Room shifted around them, walls dissolved into mist, revealing scenes from another time for women, each bound by ropes, kneeling in the dirthier. Faces streaked with tears, their eyes pleading. And behind them stood Mr. Whitmore, holding a knife. Emily recoiled, horror gripping her chest. No, she whispered, you killed Themis, he admitted, his voice almost gentle, but not out of malice, out of necessity. Stepped closer, forcing her to retreat until her back hit the wall. Shard pressed painfully into her palm. Necessity. She spatho, can murder ever be necessary? Bess. This land demands it, he hissed. Soil beneath us thirsts for blood. It keeps the crops thriving, the livestock healthy. And Emily's mind raced, piecing together fragments of old myths, tales of sacrifices made to appease restless spirits. Was that what this was? A ritual twisted beyond recognition. You're insane, she said, her voice breaking. You think killing innocent people makes you untouchably knocked? He scoffed. None of them were innocent. Each one discovered my secret. Each one tried to leave, and each paid the price of the visions faded, leaving them once more in the ruined parlor. Whitmore advanced on her, his eyes gleaming with madness. No, it's your turn. Emily raised the shard instinctively. I'm going to die here, she thought fiercely. I won't go quietly. With a cry, she lunged forward, driving the shard toward his chest, but instead of flesh, it met resistancia, force, invisible yet impenetrable, stopped her mid-strike. Whitmore laughed low and chilling. You can't harm me, girl, not while the land protects. Meth ground beneath them began to tremble. Cracks spider-webbed across the floorboards. From the depths rose a figure cloaked in shadow. It was neither man nor woman, neither human nor beast. Its form shifted, constantly dissolving and reforming. Guys like burning coals locked onto Mr. Whitmore. Served your purpose at Rasped, your debt is paid. Whitmore froze, his confidence crumbling. No, he stammered, backing away. Upheld the bargain. Figure extended a clawed hand, and with a soundless scream, Mr. Whitmore was gone. The house shuddered violently. Walls Buckled beams splinteredly fell to her knees, clutching the shard tightly around her. The shadows coalesced, taking shape. 4 women materialized, their forms solid, now radiant with a quiet strength. "Thank you," one of them said, her voice soft, yet filled with gratitude. "You've freed us." But as they began to fade, Emily realized something terrible. Shadowy figure remained. It turned its gaze upon her, and Emily understood the bargain wasn't over. It had only begun. A new shadow loomed over Emily, its presence suffocating. Its eyes burned brighter than before, twin flames that pierced through her very soul. "You have taken his place," it rasped, its voice a cacophony of whispers. Emily scrambled backward, her hands scraping against splintered wood. "What do you mean?" she demanded, though her voice trembled. "He didn't ask for this. No one asks," the figure replied, stepping closer. "But all who enter this house become part of its cyclone. Were chose willingly, however were chosen. The weight of those words crushed her chest. "Chosen by what?" "By Homan." Why? Shadow tilted its head as if amused. "This land demands sacrifice," it said. "Simpleth crops, the livestock, even the air you breath. Heal, thrive on blood spilled." And Offeringemly shook her head violently, denying the truth, staring her in the face. "No, I won't do it," she whispered. "Eddie won't kill anyone." A shadow laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "You misunderstand, girl. Your role is not to take lives, but to guard them." "Guard them?" Emily echoed, confusion warring with dread. "What does that mean?" "It means you will ensure no one leaves this house alive, just as Mr. Whitmore did." Before youth, realization hit her like a hammer blow. She'd thought she was freeing herself from the nightmare. Instead, she was being bound to it more tightly than ever. Women appeared again, their forms flickering at the edges of the room, their faces filled with sorrow, yet determination. "We tried to warn you," one of them said softly, "but the choice was never truly yours." Emily turned to them, desperation clawing at her throat. "There has to be another way," she pleaded. "A way to break the cycle." Women exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. "One person can end this," another said finale, "but it comes at a cost." "What cost?" Emily asked, fear coiling in her stomach. "The cost of your life." Came the reply. Silence fell heavy and suffocating. Emily stared at the shard, still clutched in her hand. Its edge glinted faintly, catching the dim light. She remembered the date etched into it, 1845 year. "Everything began." "If I die here?" she asked slowly. "Will it stop?" Shadow answered before the women could speak. "Your death will sever the bond between the land and the living, but only if you act willingly." "Willingly?" Emily repeated, tasting the word bitterly. "How can I willingly give up my life?" Shadow leaned closer, its form shifting unnatural. "Libis, deep down, you know there is no other way to free yourself and others. You must embrace the darkness." Women nodded solemnly. "It is the ultimate sacrifice," one of them added, "but it will bring peace to this place." "Peace?" Emily murmured. Wasn't that what she wanted all along? Her thoughts drifted back to the wagon train. The cholera epidemic. The family she had lost had come to Utah seeking a new beginning. Instead, she found herself trapped in an endless cycle of death and despair. Perhaps this was her purpose in it, to escape, but to end. "It's all right," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "Harry, doeth." Shadow straightened, its burning gaze fixed on her. "Thin, so it shall." Beatty room shifted around her, dissolving into mist. When the haze cleared, Emily found herself standing in the forest. House loomed behind her, silent and watchful. In her hand, the shard pulsed faintly, warm against her skin. She knew what she had to do. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the trees. The ground beneath her feet felt softer somehow, as though the earth itself welcomed her step. She followed the path, instinctively drawn forward by an unseen force. After what felt like hours, she reached a clearing. At its center stood a stone altar, ancient and weathered. Etched into its surface were symbols she couldn't decipher, but they seemed to hum with power. "Place the shard upon the altar." The shadow's voice echoed around her. "And seal the bargain." Emily hesitated, her hand trembling as she raised the shard. This was it, the final moment she placed it. There would be no turning back. She closed her eyes and let the shard fall. Instantly, the world erupted in chaos. Ground quaked violently, splitting open to reveal a chasm glowing with fiery light. From within rose a chorus of voices, screaming, crying, pleading. Then silence. Emily opened her eyes, Forest was gone, replaced by an endless void floating before her, were the four women, their forms radiant, now freed from the shadows. Thank you, they said in unison, their voices blending into a single melody. You have broken the curse a bit. As they faded into nothingness, Emily realized something terrible wasn't underneath. Shadow remained watching her with eyes that burned brighter than ever. You kept your word, said no, fulfill the rest before she could react. Chains erupted from the void, wrapping around her wrists and ankles. They pulled her downward into the abysses. The darkness consumed her. Emily understood the truth. Freedom came at a price, and hers was eternal servitude. Darkness swallowed Emily whole, light pressed against her skin, seeping into her lungs, until every breath felt like drowning. The chains binding her wrists and ankles tightened with each passing second, dragging her deeper into the void around her. The voices returned, louder now, a cacophony of despair. They called out names, some familiar, others, Note Abigail, Clara, Elizabeth, Martha. Beneath them, all a single word repeated endlessly. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped. Her body felt weightless yet impossibly heavy, as though gravity itself had betrayed her. Shadow loomed above her, its form shifting, constantly dissolving and reforming. You chose this path, it whispered, its voice layered with malice and triumphy. Didn't choose anything, Emily thought fiercely, though she couldn't speak. He was tricked, forced into fist. Shadow laughed, a sound like shattering glass. Strict it echoed, mocking. Lino, one forces you to make sacrifices. Girl, you did this willing. Lithe memory surged forward unbidden. Shard in her hand, the altar glowing with ancient power. She had placed it there herself, knowing full well the consequence, but had she truly understood what willingly meant? Chains yanked harder, pulling her toward something unseen. A faint light flickered in the distance, growing brighter with each passing moment. As she neared it, the voices grew louder, more insistent, helpless. They begged for you. Emily realized with a sinking heart that these weren't just the women Mr. Whitmore had killed. These were all who had ever been sacrificed on this land, their souls trapped in an endless cycle of torment. Light resolved into a massive cavern, its walls lined with countless faces etched into stoniac, face twisted in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. At the center stood a pedestal upon which rested a book bound in black leather. Shadow gestured toward. If this is the ledger, it said, every soul claimed by the land is recorded here, including yours. Emily struggled against the chains, but they held fast. What do you want from me? She demanded silently, her thoughts screaming into the void. The shadow tilted its head as if amused to maintain the balance. It replied, Simeon must oversee the sacrifices, ensure the cycle continues. So I'm trapped here forever. Emily thought bitterly, just like Mr. Whitmore Manor. Forever, the shadow corrected inly, until another takes your placide. Realization hit her like a hammer blow. The bargain wasn't over, it would never be over. The women appeared again, their forms flickering at the edges of the cavern, their faces filled with sorrow yet determination. Warned you, one of them said softly, but you wouldn't listen. Lee wanted to argue, to scream that she had been given no choice, but deep down she knew they were right. She'd known the cost and accepted it anyway. The shadow approached the pedestal, opening the ledger. Its pages glowed faintly, revealing rows of names: Abigail, Clara, Elizabeth, Martha, and finally Amelia's. It traced her name with a clawed finger. The ground trembled, faces carved into the walls began to weep tears of blood. The air grew thick with the scent of decay. You will serve as guardian, it declared, ensuring no soul escapes until the next sacrifice. With chains released, her suddenly dropping her to the ground, Emily stumbled backward, clutching her bleeding wrists. Pain was sharp and immediate, but it wasn't physical. It was as though her very soul had been branded. Women stepped closer, forming a circle around her, their expressions unreadable. Not fight it, one of them said gently. Accept your role and find peace. Peace, Emily echoed bitterly. How can I find peace when I'm condemned to this? Shadow leaned closer, its burning gaze fixed on her. Peace comes from acceptance, it raspador. So they tell themselves. Bore she could respond. The cavern dissolved into mist. When the haze cleared, Emily found herself back in the house. Of parlor lay in ruins, furniture overturned, curtains torn from their rods, but The mirror stood intact, its surface rippling like water. Her reflection stared back, distorted and unfamiliar thin. It split into two figures. In was her own face, wide-eyed and terrified. The other was Mr. Whitmore, his expression cruel and triumphant. "Thinks you're weak, he thinks you'll break, but we know better, don't we?" The voice wasn't hers, nor was it his. It belonged to the woman. Emily stepped back, heart pounding. "What do you want from me?" she asked aloud. "Haven't I already given enough?" Women exchanged glances, their expressions unreadably. "One person can end this," another said, "finale, but it comes at a cost." "What cost?" Emily asked, fear coiling in her stomach. "Cost of your life," came the reply. Silence fell heavy and suffocating. Millie stared at the shard still clutched in her hand. Its edge glinted, faintly catching the dim light. Remembered the date etched into it, 1840. "Fifth year, everything began. If I die here," she asked slowly, "will it stop?" Shadow answered before the women could speak, "Your death will sever the bond between the land and the living, but only if you act willingly." "Willingly," Emily repeated, tasting the word bitterly. "How can I willingly give up my life?" Shadow leaned closer, its form shifting, unnatural libus. "Deep down you know there is no other way to free yourself and others. You must embrace the darkness." Women nodded solemnly. "It is the ultimate sacrifice," one of them added, "but it will bring peace to this place." "Peace," Emily murmured. Wasn't that what she wanted all along? Her thoughts drifted back to the wagon train. The cholera epidemic. The family she had lost had come to Utah seeking a new beginning. Instead, she found herself trapped in an endless cycle of death and despair. Perhaps this was her purpose in it, to escape, but to end it all right, she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "Harry'll do if." Shadow straightened, its burning gaze fixed on her. "Then, so it shall be." Room shifted around her, dissolving into mist. When the haze cleared, Emily found herself standing in the forest. House loomed behind her, silent and watchful. In her hand, the shard pulsed faintly, warm against her skin. She knew what she had to do. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the trees. The ground beneath her feet felt softer somehow, as though the earth itself welcomed her steps. She followed the path, instinctively drawn forward by an unseen force. After what felt like hours, she reached a clearing. At its center stood a stone altar, ancient and weathered. Etched into its surface were symbols she couldn't decipher, but they seemed to hum with power. "Place the shard upon the altar." The Shadow's voice echoed around. "Heron, seal the bargain." Emily hesitated, her hand trembling as she raised the shard. This was at the final moment, and she placed it. There would be no turning back. She closed her eyes and let the shard fall. Instantly, the world erupted in chaos. Ground quaked violently, splitting open to reveal a chasm glowing with fiery light. From within rose a chorus of voices, screaming, crying, pleading. Then silence seemingly opened her eyes. Forest was gone, replaced by an endless void. Floating before her were the four women, their forms radiant, now freed from the shadows. "Thank you," they said in unison, their voices blending into a single melody. "You have broken the curse." But as they faded into nothingness, Emily realized something terrible. She wasn't Alaneath. Shadow remained watching her with eyes that burned brighter than ever. "You kept your word," it said. "No, fulfill the rest." Before she could react, chains erupted from the void, wrapping around her wrists and ankles. They pulled her downward into the abysses. The darkness consumed her. Emily understood the truth. Freedom came at a price, and hers was eternal servitude. The abyss pulled Emily downward endlessly. She felt herself unraveling, as though her very essence was being stripped away. Piece by piece, the chains around her wrists and ankles burned cold, yet seared her skin. Like fire, her screams echoed into the void, swallowed by the darkness that consumed everything. "You thought you could break the cycle." The Shadow's voice rasped, its tone layered with mockery and triumphant. "The cycle does not break, it shifts." Emily struggled against the pull, but her strength was gonish. Was no longer flesh and bone, but something else, something fragile and fleeting. Memory caught in the jaws of time. As she descended deeper, the void began to take shape. It resolved into a vast chamber, cavernous and ancient. Its walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting not her own face, but the faces of those who had come before her. Whitmore stood among them, his expression hollow, eyes empty sockets, staring into eternity. Women appeared. Again, their forms flickering faintly at the edges of the chamber. They watched her silently, their expressions unreadably. "You freed us," they said in unison. Their voices soft, yet resolute. "But freedom comes at a cost." "What cost?" Emily demanded, though her voice was barely a whisper. "Haven't I already paid enough?" Shadow materialized before her, its form shifting unnaturally, dissolving, and reforming. "Your life is the price," it said simply, "but your soul is the key." The realization hit her like a hammer. Both. This wasn't just about ending the curse or breaking the cycle. This was about replacing Mr. Whitmore, becoming the guardian of the land. Ensuring the sacrifices continue. "Edno," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I won't do this. I won't condemn others to this fate." The shadow laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "You already have it," replied. "Moment you placed the shard upon the altar, you sealed your fate." The mirrors around her began to ripple, their surfaces twisting and distorting. From within them emerged figures, men, women, children, all bound by invisible chains. Their mouths moved, forming silent pleas for help, their eyes wide with terror. "These are the ones who will follow you," the shadow continued, "each one drawn here by desperation, curiosity, or greed." Just as you wearily shook her head, violently denying the truth, staring her in the face. "There has to be another way," she cried, "a way to end this once and for all." Women exchanged glances, sorrow etched into their features. "There is no other way," one of them said softly. "Only death can sever the bond between the land and the living." "Death," Emily echoed bitterly. "And what happens after?" The shadow leaned closer, its burning gaze fixed on her. "After comes peace," it whispered. "Reader, so they tell themselves." Mirrors shattered simultaneously, shards of glass raining down like daggers. Each shard carried a name, a face, a story. Abigail, Clara, Elizabeth, Martha, and finally Amelia's. The shards struck the ground. They dissolved into mist, revealing a pedestal at the center of the chamber. Upon it rested a dagger, its blade blackened as though forged from shadow itself. "Take it," the shadow commanded, "and fulfill your role." Emily hesitated, her body trembling with exhaustion and despair. If she took the dagger, she would become what Mr. Whitmore had been, a warden of death, a keeper of secrets. But if she refused, the cycle would continue. Unchecked, with a cry of anguish, she reached out, grasping the dagger. Its hilt was cold, yet burned her palm like ice. If moment her fingers closed around it, the chamber erupted in light. When the brilliance faded, Emily found herself standing in the forest. House loomed behind her, silent and watchful, but this time it felt different. The air was lighter, the shadows less oppressive. Women appeared one last time, their forms radiant, now free from the weight of their torment. "Thank you," they said in unison, their voices blending into a single melody. "You have broken the curse." But as they faded into nothingness, Emily realized the truth. Curse hadn't been broken, it had merely shifted. Shadow remained, watching her with eyes that burned brighter than ever. "Welcome to your eternity," it whispered. "Guardian of the land." Emily turned toward the house. Inside the parlor, the mirror rippled like water within its surface. She saw her reflection, but it wasn't her own face staring back, it was Mr. Whitmore. Then the reflection smiled, a cold, thin smile that sent ice rushing through her veins. Whispers returned, softer, now almost comforting. "Welcome home," it said. "Welcome home." Epilogue. The forgotten truth. Years passed, and the house fell into ruin. Legends grew around it, tales of a man named Mr. Whitmore and his 4 wives. But over time, even those stories faded, buried beneath layers of history. Sometimes travelers claimed to see a figure standing near the edge of the woods, a woman dressed in black, her face obscured by shadows pointing toward the house. Those who followed her never returned. Deep beneath the earth, in a cavern filled with Marosa, figure stood before an altar, her hand clutching a dagger forged from shadow. Her name was Emily, and she waited for the next soul to enter the cycle, the end.